So why all this talk about Nolde? Because when I was thinking about it today, I don't actually really like Nolde. I don't like a lot of Nolde. Nolde is difficult. And then just when you say that, you find something like this, horses and ships, what could be better? But Nolde is difficult. Like those flower paintings, many flower paintings, they're very gnarly, but there's something like sort of brutally lovely about them. So that's one thing. Then those landscapes, I don't know, like I think you have to remind yourself that those are watercolor. So what he's doing with watercolor, but they're, I think they're very deep. That's the thing with Nolde. It's deeper than you think, and sometimes like the colors are, to me, they are actually not really appealing. But I think I ignored that because I'm like, Nolde is the greatest. And why am I thinking that? So what's all this about Nolde, aside from all this scandalous stuff that's come up in these recent years, which I'm sort of researching / refuting, or I don't really know what to think, because I just originally thought maybe he was this gentle, reclusive painter that was like super awesome genius kind of person. But then there's like the political stuff that came out because he was like the affiliations of the wartime era have put sort of like a really negative light on Nolde, and it seems like he's more of a public figure than I initially thought years and years and years ago when I quote unquote fell in love with Nolde. Going back to what this is all about, I was thinking that I actually don't like any Noldes except the one painting, but there's a few artists, and I was just mentioning this I think in the first part of talking about Nolde, where it's like literally it doesn't matter. They just did that one painting, and that one painting stuck with me or stayed with me, and it's like it really didn't matter if they did anything else, or it didn't matter if what they did was good or bad. That painting alone is like, that puts them on legendary status. I kind of feel the same way with musicians and stuff like that. It's like literally that one song, it's like it doesn't matter what you do after that point. It's like it is in your brain, and that's it. And like I just like when it comes to like a masterpiece, and like the thing is, like I mean, like I think this is one of those, but it's like I like unconventional things. A masterpiece doesn't always have to really be so sophisticated, in my opinion. But I think I kind of scaled it down to there's a handful of Noldes that are totally amazing, but it's the Last Supper one is just like I just kind of like it's like I just remembered that I forgot that was what all of it started with, and then it's kind of like I'm thinking like like why am I so obsessed with researching Nolde and stuff like that, and I kind of all this time forgot that it's because of that painting that it influenced me for so long, that I got used to it. And there's a few paintings like that. They've influenced me for so long that I've got used to them. But when I think back, there was like a period where for many years it was kind of influencing me periodically, but more like I was more aware of it. Whereas then it just sort of like got lost in my subconscious after a while. And but that kind of is what got me looking at Nolde, and then I kind of wasn't like, over all these years, I wasn't really finding, like a lot of other artists, it's like that's how I get interested in other artists, and that's why I have so many other interests in art is because I find one painting and then right away I start like looking for more. It's just like natural habit. But with Nolde, I was like not really necessarily finding more. I was kind of like finding stuff, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. But then all of a sudden I kind of got like almost like bored, or I just wasn't like really like getting what I was looking for. So I kind of forgot that that kept happening. And then even when I got more into Nolde, it's like I think I was like my sensitivity to Nold had increased. But like I said, he's a difficult painter in a way, and so like I was going there to find something, and then I kind of got just sidelined and distracted because I wasn't getting quite what I was expecting. And then like as my sensitivity towards his other work developed, I think I was kind of like still drawn back, and that's something really interesting because like I'm saying, he's difficult on one hand, and yet it's still drawing me back, even though I've forgotten the reason I went there in the first place. So that's interesting. However, all of the works that really stand out to me, which is only a handful, it might literally be 5, but maybe 10, and they're all his biblical paintings. So, unlike a few other artists that I've discovered that had many biblical paintings that I think are really, really cool and modern or avant-garde or like unconventional, but really cool. Not to saying that there are not some conventional ones that are cool, but there is a lot of conventional ones in history. And as far as the ones that like that there and of those there are many that I like, but that I think are really, really cool and or modern, not many. Like there's not many painters like that, but I have over the years discovered more, encountered more, come across some, or gradually found more. But with Nold, it's like, so the thing is, what's so cool is that that painting stuck out to me when I had no sort of quote unquote religious interest whatsoever. And then all the more when I looked at it from a religious perspective, then it kind of quote unquote religious perspective, then it became like a real major icon. It's like, yes, this is like, this means you should still paint. You shouldn't abandon the brushes. Like, if people, are doing these biblical scenes, you should keep going. That's kind of, it was like that type of thing. Plus, I was just like, I still like it. I always did like it. But anyway, of the few biblical pictures that he painted, I think they're pretty much all great. But there's only like 5 or 6 that I've been able to find. But it's like, those paintings of his are great. So it's kind of weird because it's like, he doesn't really seem like a quote-unquote religious guy. And then when you put that together with this like wartime affiliations of party associations and stuff like that, then it's like, how does a guy that is supposed to be that way paint what is, in my opinion, profoundly cool biblical pictures? Not stock or not conventional pictures, but in fact, the only avant-garde, the only modern, the only super cool, not at all like cheesy, not at all religious biblical paintings, or like not at all kind of like conventional biblical paintings, but just like super cool. But they are kind of naive looking. There's always this naive quality to Nold, and I find that attractive. So I have to admit that. But nonetheless, I see them as very sort of modern or expressive or whatever you want to call it. But then like so if I've like scaled all the stuff of his like that are his stuff, scaled down all the stuff of his that are like to those 5 or 6, that handful of biblical pictures, then it's like, okay, so it doesn't really matter, but like, why? There's two questions. Why does a guy that doesn't really seem to be, I don't know, like if I say I don't know anything about him, then why could he not have just like a bunch of landscapes, a bunch of figure paintings, a bunch of flower paintings, and then a few really profound, quote unquote, religious paintings? Why couldn't he? So that kind of makes sense to me, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like he's quote unquote religious at all. So why does he have such profoundly cool biblical paintings? Is it because he's not quote unquote religious? Because all the, like, you know, like Michelangelo or any of those, they were like openly like believers or whatever. And yet then I question, because all those guys that were open were also part of a generation where people were open about being believers. So now you have a guy that is not professing any kind of faith at all, happens to paint the most profoundly cool biblical pictures. There's that, and then there's, why is it that most of his stuff, okay, if I just paint it with a broad brush, then I say I don't like it because it's difficult. Like the colors and the, it's sort of off-putting. Like it's difficult stuff. So if I say the only stuff of his that I like, then why is it that that only stuff that I like is those biblical paintings? And especially when he's not really a biblical person. But although I have heard that maybe he was, or like the way that it was portrayed was that he was trying to create this image of himself, that he'd only been raised on the Bible and stuff like that. I don't know about that. Was he trying to create this image? And or then, like with these paintings, was he trying to create an image of himself? That's really weird too, because it's like, dude, you're doing a really good job of painting like actually very sincere, intimate biblical paintings, and yet this is like some kind of like a farce or whatever. Like it just, it's so hard to figure out that. But in a way, it doesn't matter. Those paintings are what they are, and like to me, like it's kind of cool that they are, like in my opinion, the best. And like this painting gives me that feel a little bit. There's something about this painting, this just the simplicity of it. I'm just trying to remember because I never saw this painting, I never noticed it before. But I'm just trying to remember what the title is again, and it seems to escape me. But I think the thing that stood out to me was going back to like that Last Supper picture. I'm not sure now if that was the one last thing I want to conclude. Like, I'm not sure if that picture still stands out from those 4 or 5 other religious paintings, but like, two, like, I don't know, Christ among the children is really cool, and Pentecost is really cool. And then, like, Christ, I think, what is it? Christ with healing a man or whatever is also really cool, but like a little bit more, not like quite as intense to me, or like, or the burial is like, is very cool. Like, probably the least of them is the crucifixion one. That one, it kind of attracted me, but then when I would say it's the least of all of them. But like the Pentecost seems as cool as the Last Supper. It's just that I never saw it. But it's hard to say. And then like Christ among the children also is like, if not more so, it is like very cool. Like that is an awesome, amazing painting that I just like love. But like, let's say even those two, are they cool or as cool as the Last Supper, which is the painting that really stuck out to me. Like when, like in the years of my first like discovering the world of fine arts or international paintings or modernism, that painting really stuck out to me. And like to me, there's a certain kind of like either a brutal or like a naive quality, or like what's the word? Um, I think like almost like brutalist or something like that. There's that. There's this certain quality to it that really stands out. Like there's an awkwardness to it, but then I think it's mixed with the color. Like it's like in that painting alone, his color finally lands in a way that is just spectacular. It's like the whole, like everything comes together. The whole stiffness and awkwardness and naivety or primitive. I think maybe that's the word I was kind of looking for. The sort of primitive feel of it. It all comes together perfectly. So it's like you know, like I think that's the whole idea I'm getting at with the masterpiece thing too. It's not the one that the artist tries to make. It's the one that sort of like history itself proves is the masterpiece. It's like it's not the one you try to make. It's the one that just happens. That's the masterpiece, right? So it's kind of like your job as the artist is to just keep working. You can't like yeah, you try to make certain masterpieces, but history is the final like judge. History is the final judge on that. That's kind of the way that I feel about that. Because it's too great for anyone to really realize that in the moment of creation, like, you know, it's like an Olympic athlete. Like, you just do your job and you just try to get as close to the gold medal as you can by all of your training and effort. But like, whether you win a gold, silver, bronze, or don't get a medal is really kind of up to quote unquote fate, isn't it? Like that's like literally the difference between like 0.0001 seconds if you look at it, right? So it's just like you're just trying to get the ball in the court, and then history kind of proves or chooses or judges what the masterpiece is. So that's the concluding thing, is like that's what all of Nolde is about, is that one painting. But it is, you know, it's like it breaks down from there, because I'm like, okay, it's like that one painting. But then there's those 6 other biblical paintings. And then there's the 2 or 3 of those that are super amazing. But then all the flower paintings, it's like they're actually really cool flower paintings because they're not pretty, they're not sweet, they're not fluffy, they're not airy fairy flower paintings. They're like brutal, hardcore, like they're just gnarly, crusty flower paintings. And like when I think about that, I'm like, okay, no, wait, that is cool, you know? And then when I think about his landscapes, I'm like, those landscapes are cool because they're so intense that they're just about color. And we all know that his reputation has to do with color. And those paintings prove like, it's like they're distinctly landscapes, and yet the color is so profusely intense that it is just like slamming down any kind of referential connection. It's like it's destroying any kind of like representational connection, and it's going, I am pure abstraction by the sheer force of color, like destroying the representational elements. So that in and of itself is very cool. And then when it comes back to his other figure paintings, there is lots of really cool stuff going on. Like the whole fact that it's, again, there's elements of that brutalism, primitivism, naivety, downright sort of just like, it's just like he's like mocking the whole art process by just doing these incredibly crude things. And I did discover just recently one or two paintings that show that he could paint like almost every artist that I look, I find this, that he could paint really, like he could be a really, really sophisticated draftsman. A couple of his earliest profile portraits uh, were very, very sophisticated draftsmanship. You could see that right there. Like there was nothing primitive, naive. It was not brutalistic. It was just like very, very skillfully and sincere and very proficient draftsmanship and very, technically and visually appealing pictures that he clearly had a mastery of. There was no question about that. And as well, a couple other earlier works that seem to be very, very, very masterful, expressive types of paintings, but of a far kind of more sort of conservative or restrained or just different style than most of the other breadth of his work that we're accustomed to, which is that sort of very much more sort of like savage or brutal or whatever, primitive kind of thing. So that again is interesting to discover. And as well, he also, which was one other cool thing to discover, he also apparently was making pretty good money early on because he kind of did these very sort of like, almost like, I guess it was more like illustrative work. Like he kind of did these like postcard things or whatever. Well, they were. That's absolutely what they were. But yeah, they're kind of more like very sort of like cartoony or fables, like children's fables or something like that. Kind of like, and apparently those were quite popular or whatever. He was making pretty good money, and then eventually fell through, and then he was going through hard times or something like that. The story goes. Typical, whatever. But I didn't know that he had any relationship to the sort of like quote unquote regular Joe world, in his history. So that's kind of interesting. But he also seems like he was really proficient at doing those, and it kind of seems like a weird discovery because that sort of cute type of a picture doesn't really seem to fit with all this stuff, but it throws it into another cool light because it shows his proficiency and his flexibility or diversity as well. But I don't think I'll ever know the answer to that question, but it's like, the answer to my introductory question is why, what is about Nolde? Well, it's like it could basically be one painting. But then my conclusion is that it just breaks down from there. It goes from one painting, and then it's like all these other could-be's. Like if I discovered any of those other ones at any other time, like literally anything in his whole oeuvre or whatever could be like really cool masterwork as well, so it's like it doesn't seem like, it seems like that one painting really has that striking and unique and profound powerful quality, but there's so many of those others that are just so like close or like intriguing or like potentially, just like on that same level. So it's hard to say, and it's kind of a bit of a mystery. But um, the mystery still remains as far as like, like how does this guy that supposedly got this negative political reputation that's come out over the recent years, how does, it wouldn't be the first time a guy with a negative reputation did some cool sort of like primitive painting or whatever. I mean, look at Picasso. He's full of contradictions and he's got tons of cool paintings. So it's like many other artists or like artists that had some kind of like, negative representation still did cool pictures. But then it's like, it's a different thing when you see that it's not just a cool painting, but there is a biblical reference, and that just so happens to land or manifest itself in a very, very unique and powerful and sincere and intimate and cool and fresh and exciting and modern biblical painting. Like, there is not that much out there in all the seas or world of fine arts like that is on that caliber. So if he was sort of not really a believer, quote unquote, or whatever, then how did he pull that off? And or if he has these kind of like, if the negative political leanings or affiliations that have come to the surface are true, then how does that fit in? It's like, for example, like how would if you got a guy that's just so happens to be doing the coolest quote unquote religious or biblical pictures, like very profound and intimate and sincere, and then the guy's like racist. Like, that just does not, like how do you have like a racist guy doing like the coolest spiritual paintings? That just does not seem to really make sense. So like, I've gone in the direction of more like trying to really sift through, like, does all of that negative stuff stand? Like, I'm saying that, like, he may have been doing some of that political stuff in a way to either fit in, to get fame, or to just sort of even preserve his own reputation, life, image, any or all of the above. Like he might have been, I have no idea about the time, place, milieu of his life, like the nitty-gritty details about his life as it actually was. Who knows what his motivations were? So even though he may have done some things that seemed overtly racist, anti-Semitic, prejudice, or his affiliations with the party, even though he may have done things like that, like literally, it's like, how can you even prove that he was really involved with that? Because see, the thing is, like, I know from the perspective of an artist, like, I see that evidence. I see the evidence of those paintings. It's just like, that doesn't just happen. Like, that comes from sincerity. That comes from a place of the heart. There, it's like there is a joy, there is a tenderness. Like, you just don't get paintings like that when there's not a profoundly intimate, tender, loving, joyful, it could be any or all of those things, but all of those are like major things. Compassionate, like, these are not small things. These are like the big pillars of life. And he's like got those things, or like any or all of those things. It's like it's like you just don't get a painting, or you just don't get work like that from nothing. You get that from from deep within the soul, you know, like when you're grounded in those things deep within your soul, then the art reflects it. Because it's like I said, you're doing art without thinking and trying that much. And so the art speaks for itself too. You know, we always say like let's sort of like focus on the art. Let's let the art speak for itself, and the art is speaking for itself. The art is saying something different than what history has brought to light, in my opinion. So I'm kind of like, you know, I'm shelving that, or I'm just kind of like putting that spin on it, where I'm saying I'm not ready to conclude. Like, I think there's this battle of like trying to redeem him, as I was saying, as I was just talking before. It's like trying to redeem him, because I'm always trying to redeem anyone and everything. But then it's like fighting with this knowledge that seems like it's solidified. Like there was this kind of like part where I just didn't know that much, or maybe the information hadn't come out there, or I hadn't done the research. But it's like the information is now solidified. But now that it's solidified, all of a sudden I've been doing this research, and now, like I said, it's come to the point where other evidence has come to the forefront, which is the work, the art. Has, you know, when I look at it, then I'm like, as I've just said, you just don't get that from this sort of like malevolent person or whatever. It's just, but it does happen, or it seems like it's been known to happen. And last but not least, it has happened in a huge way, where you've had, like, I've literally seen that life proves more and more. This is like where it gets really intense. That as an old man, I've seen more and more and more that life proves specifically the very opposite of what you've been thinking all along. Like, all along you've been thinking like that people are really like a sharpened pencil point, where they're very like they're all part of something that leads to one thing, when in fact I've seen totally the opposite, to the extent that I have seen these most horrific monsters affiliated with these historical tragedies and corruption and wickedness, and you know the horrific regimes and ideologies and the tyrannical regimes and powers. People affiliated with those at times, they're doing like, I don't know, like this is a bit of a stretch, but like literally sometimes it seems like you know, you get like a composer like Wagner or whatever that's similar. I was like, that's another person that I was like, how do you put that together? That like it's almost the exact same story as Nolde with Wagner. You're just like, wait a second. Like, you listen to this music that comes from a deep place in his soul, and then you're saying that he was prejudiced too, or like, you know. I always thought prejudice was the most evil word, but what is prejudice? Prejudice means you're putting yourself before someone else. You know? It's like, doesn't seem as evil. I always thought prejudice meant racist. So anyway, whether Wagner was racist, prejudiced, anti-Semitic, whatever, all very kind of bad, evil, corrupt, or whatever. Like it's not acceptable. And so it's almost the exact same story, it seems like to me, because you have someone on this level of doing something so profound. But what I'm saying is that it seems like I'm struggling to find any examples. But one example comes to mind that I don't really have the details of to mention with any clarity. but like literally, you get these people that on one hand they seem to be affiliated with all these negative or nightmarish things, and like I think it says something about the normal average person. It's like on the outside and on the inside they're like two different things, whatever. But that's not quite what I mean. It's more like it's that exact point that people are two different things. They're both like a monster and a saint. That's exactly what the normal reality is. And then I guess by extension, maybe then you could say, which is the point I'm trying to make, is that often you see the very opposite, where the normal person is kind of a monster and a saint at the same time. What you see is that in many cases, the biggest monsters on the flip side are like the most profound achievers, saintly people, or like composers, or whatever. Like they're, it's just like, so it's like literally almost seems like the bigger the monster, the bigger the saint. Like to that extreme reality, like that's almost how weird life is. Like, I guess my point is that is what I see almost more than what I expect to see. That, if somebody's like really, really good or seems really good on the outside, then they probably are so much better on the inside, but we don't even see how good they really are. That they actually do all these nice, kind things that we never see. I think that's kind of the idea that we like to have, like the sharpening pencil. It's like we only see part of it, but then the reality is that they do all this cool stuff and we don't even see it. Whereas I'm saying no, that is actually what we tend to think, that this sort of tunnel vision, but it's not like that. What I'm seeing is that, or similarly, that actually, like this is, I'm not gonna go on any further, guys. I'm serious. Like this is I think the better example of that is that I got lost there a little bit. I think what I'm trying to say is that what I see as an old man is that, like, basically what you have is when people are good at one thing, generally they're good at a whole bunch of things. That's what I'm really trying to say. Okay? But that is what I'm trying to say, is that, like you think that you can only be good at one thing, but like that, and I think that really sort of seems to apply with these eccentric artists and composers and musicians and all this stuff, right? That we think that there is, like, they're all, they got the Einstein thing going on, right? Where they're all genius in that way, and then they're total klutz. Like, they're not even, and I mean, I certainly see that with me. Like, sometimes I'm just the most disheveled looking person, but I mean, like, whatever. I'm not saying that I'm a genius, but whatever, like, but I don't think that is always the case. Often I see people, so often, it's kind of like this unwritten law that it's like when you're good at one thing, you're going to be good at a lot of stuff. And I think that the reality is that you create a shortcut in knowing how to be good at stuff. By being good at one thing, you automatically know how to be good at things. That's the weird part, is that you like, by being good at one thing, you know how to be good at things. And then so you just apply that to a whole bunch of other stuff quickly. Whereas a lot of people don't really ever develop that sort of genius level in one thing, and therefore they never develop that genius level in a whole bunch of other things. So it's kind of like there's like that verse in the Bible that says, to the one person that's given much, even more will be given. And then to the person that little has been given, even what they have been given will be taken away. And you're like, huh? What the? Like, whoa. You know, you're just like, whoa. This is like, where did this come from? Like, this came from, like, way out left field. It's just like you're saying all these things. The scriptures are confirming all these cool, positive, or like, affirming or edifying things, and then you're like, bring this in? Like, and that's why I love scripture, because you're never going to go too far before you just get this one thing come way out of left field and make you not feel too cozy about anything, which is really cool because the Bible or the scriptures give you so much that it is so far in excess or superior to what is out there floating around the world that it's almost very comforting that you find something that grounds you. Like, it just takes you back down to earth because you're so flying high above earth with the things you find in scripture that it's good to find something that just hurls you right back down to earth and just kind of like shakes your foundations, because you're just like, at that point it's just like you're like, whoa, what does anything mean? Like, almost. But like, generally I think the feeling is more like, what I also like about scripture is that there's a much more cryptic level of comprehension. Like, when your things are affirming and edifying, it's not always that readily accessible. And then so similarly, when things kind of seem like a little bit of a curveball, you're not necessarily thrown back that much. You're not, I don't know, I kind of get this feeling, like, at least right now, that it's kind of like you're still kind of trying to process it, but at the same time your soul knows exactly. That's like, there's this cool, I don't know, multi-layered comprehension of the things going on. You're like, yes, you get it, and then some things you're like, yeah, you get it, but, and then sometimes you're like, yeah, you get it, but then you're like, but does that really what it kind of means? And then even on the back of your mind going, yeah, it does, you kind of need to like go and think about it for a week or a few months or sometimes a few years. And a lot of times those things that you think that, like, after a few years, when you finally click into them, they become like so central in a way that it's amazing that you didn't know them, but you did. It's just that you had to discover that those were really what it is talking about. The last will become first, and the first will become last. Exactly. You know, it's just like, once you get it, like, it can take years, but then you're like, yes. And then, like, that actually, where it was kind of an uncertainty or a hazy thing, it is like a major, like, life principle guiding so many things going on. Like, and one other tangent is like, I've been going on to as an old man, how the negative things, the things that I kind of like, I took the good, you know, like, I feel like the oddball in life because I looked at the good side of everything and I never wanted to dwell on the hard things. Where when the hard things hit me, they hit me hard. Like, it's just like realizing evil, you know, like realizing all the truth of it, and then coming to align that with, it says, don't be surprised when ... happens. Don't be surprised. Do not be shocked when such and such happens. And you're like, yeah. Like, it says, like, do not be shocked if they're going to treat you this way. Or do not be, you know, if you see a martyr, like, do not be shocked when this happens. And you're like, yeah. But fortunately, you're kind of thinking in your mind, fortunately, we live in like 2,000 years later, where kind of like, you know, you don't really face, well, yeah, actually you do. Like, for example, like, I'm really going off the rails here now, but I gotta get it off my chest, because it's like, you know what? Don't kid yourself. Like, you are seeing it. you are seeing those nightmares right now. Like they are going on. Like self, me, okay? You are seeing them. Like, and that is creepy, freaky. That's like whatever. Uh, I don't really, that's sort of incomprehensible. But anyway, this has like almost become like a two-part lecture or whatever. Um, so it's like the first half was concluding with this master work that seems to define Nolde, and I just kind of want to say, like, where's Nolde coming from? Like what is all this stuff about Nolde? And it's like that is the reason. It's that picture. But like I am kind of flirting with this idea of this handful of others. Really, kind of, even though all the other works in his oeuvre seem to have so much cool stuff about them, I really think it's those 4 or 5 that are really incredible masterpieces in a way. Because whatever's going on, whatever's going on in his personal or spiritual life, those 3 or 4 or 5 paintings to me are really, really exceptional and real masterpieces, like totally without compare, almost. Although I would like to compare myself with him, and I think I honestly feel like, I don't want to brag, but I honestly feel like it's a tribute to him and his influence that I think like I've kind of followed in those footsteps, and I'd like to think at least that maybe I've done similar, that like I don't feel like I've got a lot of finished work, but in the work that I have, which is quite extensive, I'd like to think that there are at the very least maybe a handful of quote-unquote masterworks that, like even with the breadth of time myself, I can look back and say, I think that those are going to stick around and have a lasting impact. And that's cool. Like, I feel blessed to to be part of that, or to be participating in that, or to have, blessed to be able to be part of the production of, or whatever, however you might look at it. Like, I don't know. I think like I've gone through a lot of hardships in life, but it sure seems to make have a lot of resonance if I kind of think that maybe this is something that I am part of accomplishing. And at the very same time, like in lieu of the very things that I've mentioned, like I am very, not necessarily exactly eager to credit myself with anything to do with art, because I don't know. Like, going back to what I was saying, and just in conclusion, for real, was that like I have, after many years, begun to see more of a kinship with art and the artist towards the believer and the life of the believer as a man or woman of God than I ever did previously, practically, I would say, or then, and this is where it's a real stretch, but then than anywhere else in life or the average person. So it's that this weird dynamism is that conversely, it's not the most powerful slash deepest people, but it's actually the superficial people that are closer to God. It's the artist, the person that's dealing with mere images, mere imagery, mere plastic form, death. They're dealing with flesh in its most base form. That's what painting is. It's images. It's plasticity. It's mere material form that manifests, or it sort of like, it appears to be deep and sophisticated and intellectual and all this stuff in the circles that we associate with art. But then you look at it and it's like, actually, no, the average family man or family people are much deeper than the artist, right? Which is kind of why artists are hated, because they fly in adversity to this intimacy that's in the natural person in a way, more pronounced. So it's so weird. But what I'm saying is, again, I'm contradicting that yet again, and I'm saying no. By virtue of being the artist, the artist is not the deeper person after all. And yet, conversely, they are closer to God. That's the whole weird thing. I mean, it's just so paradoxical. It just becomes vicious, like a bunch of circles. You're like, so who's closer to God? Well, what I'm saying is like, the average normal person is closer to God. But by virtue of the artist sort of being, in a way, such a freak of superficiality, they are almost closer to God by default of being on a path that just cuts through entanglement in the world. Glad I kind of nailed that down, because I was really grasping for a connection to where the heck I was going with that. But that's kind of I think what it is. It's like they, in a way, like, I look at me, my life has taken such a like curveball. It's like literally like a shit show. It's like a mess, and so it's like I am kind of like, if not that for reason, then some of the other ways of looking at this, it kind of makes actually a closer connection to God. But what I was actually trying to say about that was that this kinship certainly is more pronounced than I thought ever before, or that I ever kind of was willing to recognize, or maybe not just recognize, but what's the word? Yeah, it just came and went, like similar to recognized. Like I didn't give it credit for, kind of like that. I'm not sure if that was the word. I refuse to accept that, and now I can't remember what I was trying to say by that. Oh yeah, but as is the philosopher in me always rejects art at the end of the day. So it's like, that's exactly it. It's like, I just keep going round and round circles. Everyone knows that. Like, I always put everything in its place at the end. I'm like, no, you're just an artist. Like, shut the hell up. But I'm kind of just saying, I'm dancing with that idea. I'm like, the artist is the best and the worst. That's where I like to leave it. That aporia that Dare talks about, almost. So this is an example of it. Like, I'm content to leave it there, to leave it as a question, and that then goes, I guess, back to again what I was saying. It's like, are the artists the monsters or the saints? And I'm like, well, no. Okay, so just leave it there. That's pretty much it. Like, you have the average people, and you have the average people's intimacy and connection with God and with truth. And then you have the artist who is kind of like, seems to be potentially a monster and potentially a saint. And leave it there. That aporia, that uncertainty. It's good enough. So the artist is kind of like, they're not the normal. They're either the sort of extreme or the extreme, but they don't seem to be the normal. And the reason I like to leave it there is because then what it means is, it goes back to me, how I'm looking at myself. It's like, yes, I am maybe privy to be able to, fathom a connection like with Michelangelo or with Nolde or Leonardo or any other person for that matter, that's, kind of like so culturally or whatever esteemed. But at the same time, I'm going, no, is that just like Dostoevsky does with that priest, that when he dies, he stinks worse than anyone else? That's exactly what it is. Because, like, I kind of, when I read that, I'm like, come on, like, that's just, like, I thought, like, there's those times where Dostoevsky, where I thought, like, he was so great, and then, like, his greatest moments were not those points. Those points, he took it too far. But at the same time, that kind of stays with me a little bit, and I kind of have to, like, question it, Like, that priest that seemed so sensitive and kind hearted and sincere, like it, I think that was just like a joke that he that he like stunk worse than anyone else when he died. Like, it's kind of like just like him saying like, hey, never, never, ever underestimate anyone. Like, even, and that's kind of how I am with me. It's like, I gotta tell it to my own self. It's like, don't you ever underestimate your own self. You are the worst of the worst. You are just the most superficial. You are a urchin. You are just like a total urchin. So don't you ever forget it, So it's like, maybe Leonardo, Michelangelo, Nolde, Picasso, they were all a bunch of urchins too. Who knows? But like, who am I to laud and esteem myself, to compare myself? It's just like everything breaks down. Am I better? Are they better? It's like, so the philosopher comes to the forefront and just basically turns everything upside down. It's a total shitstorm. Nothing's figured. Nothing's certain. Total aporia, like Derrida's term, uncertainty and unknown. But that's kind of what I like. That's always, in a way, what I like to do. But I don't want to cause chaos in my mind or in anyone else's mind. But I kind of like that of like, and so in closing, that is it for me. Like, I feel like my heart tells me that I have been part of maybe producing something that's cool like that. And maybe, like, just to put it in the nicest way for me is to think that has a lasting impact. And I think that to me means a lot. But then, and it's kind of like, it's sort of, but it's like, does that give my life meaning and sense? Well, already I'm struggling because wait a minute, for one brief minute it does, and then for another it doesn't, because I've just been thinking like, no, it's the fact that the gospel was preached to me and that the doors of invitation were presented to me and I accepted the truth. That is the crown glory of my life, which somehow seems to escape me. Like, then it's like I spend hours and hours in aesthetic obsessions, to the point where You know, it's like, am I just thinking and adopting the ways of the world that says, yes, you know, you're kind of like Leonardo, like he didn't do a lot, but he did a few great pieces, and you know, meanwhile, he was kind of like a cool person that thought about all this other cool, you know, comparing myself to, like, I've just spent, like, have I spent my entire adult life just comparing myself to these literary or poetic or poetry icons, you know, like, I could have done, you know, have done that with sports, but no, I spent most of my life comparing myself to these literary figures and stuff like that, and it's just like, are you just so consumed with the ways of the world that, you know, then you feel really good, you're like, yes, I have done something on par with Leonardo, or with you know, any of these other renowned figures, that kind of consolidates your life to having some weight, you know. So it's like, it's really, really like, you know, I guess, I don't know, as an older man, it's just kind of like, I'm feeling like I'm getting to where I wanted to be, and then I'm like, I hate this. Like, I literally, to the point where I hate it, because it's refreshing, because I can almost feel in line with scripture more than I ever thought I would. Like, I really feel like I do hate it, but it's taken a while where I really have, it's had to marinate. It's had to marinate for me to see how disgusting it is, this whole art. It's just like, it's taken decades for me to be able to see. It's like, why do I like to draw? You know, it's like going back, like really, like all these things that, like, every foundation that I thought, okay, it's like, you know, art is a little bit pretentious, but at least you're grounded in drawing, which is such a natural, happy thing that goes back to when you're a child. And then you're like, man, the further you go back, you're like, there's like childhood trauma. Like, why do you start drawing? You know, it's just like nothing is safe and sacred. Like, I literally had to go back and root through every single thing and just going, man, nothing. You put it at the feet of God. You know, it's like, I don't know, like, why, I don't know why I'm going way off on this tangent. Maybe it's necessary, because I'm like, why am I bringing up this stupid obsession with mold in the first place? You know, I'm like trying to, like, I'm caught in the fact of like trying to sort of consolidate, or not, maybe not consolidate, but to approve my own self. So the whole thing is just, in a way, a pathetic endeavor, really. So it lights upon this point of being interesting, heartfelt, and fascinating, and yet I think that it's just kind of like the old man when he says, I am going to judge myself and just go, okay, that's where it stops, and right away it's like back to reality. It's like, you got things to do, you got things to think about, and that really doesn't kind of matter. But it's like, it can be cool and it can be nice, but at the same time it can be like, don't forget that it just could be a bunch of complete, like, just total hogwash shit, you know, like, yes, maybe you did do something quote unquote kind of nice and sincere and heartfelt, but at the same time you did avoid really, really important things that have festered or like spiraled into things that you have not even noticed. You know, it's just like a chain reaction of negative things. Like, you know, it's the whole thing that I've been like thinking I'm righteous for like 3 decades, and it's like all of a sudden this year it's like, well, you're righteous in your mind, but you know, you're thinking, I'm righteous in my mind, but because of grace, I didn't really do anything. It's just grace gave it to me. But then, like, you look at it from the other way. It's like, so basically, you didn't do anything with your righteousness for the last 30 years, but you kind of felt like you were righteous, but actually, you had nothing to do with it. That righteousness was imputed to you. And you had nothing to do with it. So you had nothing to do with it, and you did nothing, but it was imputed to you anyway. So it's like, why did it take you 30 years to realize that? And yet you have this warm, fuzzy feeling like, yes, I'm kind of righteous, I'm in league with God, and I'm not making a big fanfare of it or nothing, I'm just kind of living my life quietly, and at the same time it gives me this nice, warm, fuzzy glow. But all of a sudden, I realize it's like, okay, basically you are an evil, sinful person bought and sold in an evil, sinful, corrupt world, and that is who and what you are. Now, I don't want to go down the way of like just all that stuff, kind of trying to get into this doom and gloom. But it's just like this, what I realized was, it's like I have been living the life of a compassionate person, but I've just like masked over the fact that I'm still just this like teenager with all these obsessions that fill my day. And like those very obsessions are totally like carnal to the point where it is almost just like insanely asinine. Like it's just like, and then it does delve off into all these realms where it just becomes very, very pronounced lust, and or at vices at different time in my life. So it's like my life, it's like, okay, there's this stream of this strain of compassion that runs through the mature adult years, but at the same time there's this vast breadth of carnal, at the very least, nothingness. So it's like literally you're coming to the judge and he's saying you have done nothing for 30 years save this kind of like warm, fuzzy, compassionate, like when people cross your path thing, habit. So it's like very humbling that it's like I am actually just like this kind of carnal, evil person. And somehow, like that, and then somehow I've been thinking that I'm righteous, but it's like the righteousness was imputed to me. Totally. Like I think, I had to get rid of that idea that it was somehow kind of like more like ingrained in me. It wasn't. So like, I don't want to sound all doom and gloom or like I'm condemning myself so much, because I don't want to sound like I'm condemning anyone else out there, and kind of like, although I'm corroborating with all those sort of humble or appearance of humble stories of people saying I'm such a sinner and stuff, I don't really want to jive and click with that sentiment. Typical me, right? No, I can never be the same as anyone else. But sorry to say, that's just the way I am, and like that's not really what I think that I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that like, I guess like I think I have been kind of living like a saint in a way. And I've certainly had that idea in my mind. But that was all fine and good. What I didn't do was check that idea with the boss. And when after 30 years, I found myself over last year just going, what is this thing? There's this thing, something like that. This is meant to point out to me. Well, what that thing is that you kind of didn't really seem to clue in for these last 30 years that righteousness of which you're exhibiting a nice strain of compassion from was entirely imputed to you. As a young man, and from even before that, from the days of your youth, it was imputed to you, and it formulated your persona from earlier in your youth, fortunately, where you probably made a greater, in the years where you were like having an awkward childhood, you probably made greater progress for the kingdom of God in those years in generating your whole sort of pseudo-righteous personality in those years of not fitting in than you did in these last 30 years as an adult, where you say, I've rededicated my faith, or I've rediscovered God, or I've accepted God formally as a mature man, and yet done nothing. Like, sure, you have been inspired to do things, but then you kind of came to a point within like 2 or 3 years max where you're like, I can't actually seem to like just drop everything and go for a walk with the Lord, you know? And then all of a sudden 30 years go by and you're just like, you did all this stuff. And I think the big thing that has happened in my life is that all of a sudden God said, listen, for 30 years, we've just kind of like let you do nothing. But now, the thing is that you're drifting away. And like 30 years has gone by and you didn't really notice, but the thing is like, you're kind of drifting away, and so now I gotta step in. Because you asked me to keep you close. You asked me that. See, that's the thing. Not to say that it's actually what I asked that God is doing. I think God is just stepping in anyway. But this is kind of literally the point. It's like, if it's like you can't actually really do that. Like, you kind of were just coasting along, but it's like you can't really do that. It's just kind of like you already like what you didn't really realize was you just coasted to the edge of the earth, and now you're ready to fall off back into hell. So, and now maybe things are more complicated too. So it's kind of like, you know, like again, like back to the artist, I'm going like, this whole artist thing and all these other artists, is this not a perverted prophetic role? And all the leagues and seas of people in the visual arts are actually a perverted prophetic spirit, having a form of godliness but denying its power. So it doesn't matter how big that sea is. It doesn't matter how many people are doing it. If you're not doing what God asks you to do, and if Noah is doing it, and only 10 people get on the ark, it doesn't matter how many hundreds, thousands, or billions of people are doing what they're doing, or it could be the whole League of Artists, or it could be the whole League of Humanity doing what they're doing, loving digital life in La La Land. It doesn't matter how many people are doing it, it's just like in one flash, it's like it's not enough. The door shuts, and it's just like, you just all thought that it was a numbers game, that you couldn't possibly, you just didn't conceive that you possibly didn't get it. You know, it's just like God said, I want you to jump through this hoop. And you said, we're going to do all this other stuff, and we're going to like consider that. But because there's so many of us, we basically are pretty sure that you're not going to put us all in hell. So, or whatever, you know, it's kind of like you couldn't possibly put us all in hell. Well, what happened? So, Yeah. I could keep going. What hell is on earth and heaven is on earth. But also life can just stop. Or, it's like you can stop the hell and then